Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Mount Olive. Let's begin our worship this evening by singing number 768. Number 768. No, so. Number 907. Number 907.
Good evening and welcome to the service. Psalm 100, verse 1 and 2, make a joyful noise unto the Lord, all ye lands. Serve the Lord with gladness. Come before his presence with singing. I kept thinking about that phrase, serve the Lord with gladness. And that's wherever we're at. It doesn't matter what we do, we're to serve the Lord with gladness, to serve the Lord. This evening, we're going to kind of zero in on serving the Lord in voluntary service. And that's one way to do it. In this morning's Sunday school, I think the last question in the men's quarterly is like, why doesn't the Lord just take us out of this world? Well, it's because that we're the light and the salt, and we're the ones that's carrying on the work of Jesus since he left. And so we have a work to do. And whether we give our time or whether we do it in our daily activity, we all have a responsibility to spread the gospel. So this evening, I guess the order of the service is we'll have prayer, and then we'll have Doran Eby and Milton Shank give their VS experiences in completely different eras, but VS in every era, which basically started after 1W, if anybody remembers what that is. After that era was over, everybody said, "Oh, we're home free now. We don't have to go to do any type of a service." So there was a period of time there that there wasn't too many people volunteer service, but the church has improved vastly since that, I believe, and it's a thing that we know about, and I think tonight we want to make a case for VS. After each person is done, I've asked if they would give just a minute or so to anybody who has questions concerning their work or the way they did it. So we're going to have Doran and Milton give theirs, and then we'll have a song and stand up and give a little change of position, and then Brent Mass will do his. Let's kneel for prayer. Thank you, Lord, for this opportunity to come to your house again. We thank you for this privilege. We realize it's a gift from you. Now we pray, Lord, that you would be with us this evening as we hear experiences of people who have done voluntary service. We pray that you would give them clear thoughts and help them to articulate what they would like to say, and give us hearing ears that we could understand, and that we would be encouraged. So be with each speaker this evening. Pray that you would bless them. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Give our time to Doran. 15 or 20 minutes.
Good morning, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Brother Arvin talked to me about this topic when I was at his house for a Sunday lunch, and we had a discussion about why it seems like a beachy Mennonite church when I was young, the youth go to a VS service a lot more than we might. And we had some discussion, and it led into him asking me to talk about my time at Mountain View. And I like what he said about a different era. I had to reach back into some cobwebs, and I actually interviewed my sister to try to remember some of the things. And this is my story. May not be the best reason to go into VS, but that's how it was. And I'm going to tell my story, and I'm going to give you some pros and cons of what I saw there, and in the end, a couple Bible verses as well. And as an introduction, I know there's a lot of ways to serve. Lots of you spent many hours back at the school when we were building it, And if anything reminded me of Mountain View, it was kind of that, of working together for a goal and just bringing everybody together with different gifts and just working together. There's lots of ways to give. You can buy somebody lunch. You can go on a CAM trip. You can go to OFJ. What I'm kind of zoning in on, though, is a year of voluntary service where you leave your home, you go, you live there. We have Faith Mission, we have Mountain View. There's a Hillcrest home down in Arkansas. We have Mennonite Air Missions and Allegheny Boys Camp, places that you would go for a year or more than a year. So my first recollection of somebody who went to VS service, other than my parents' age of men in 1W service, was Everett Eby. He went to Haiti and he drilled wells for a while. I don't know how long it was. The other couple was Myron and Janet Martin down at Yarrisburg. They went to Mountain View as a married couple. And so that was my first kind of hearing stories. Some of his buddies would come by and visit our church. And I remember my sister being down there and visiting her, but like I said, I had to interview her and ask her why. So she graduated from Hewitt School. I believe there was 4 in her class. One of the first actual graduates of you, Keith Linford, David Myers type age group. I know she's a little older, but most of us dropped out, and that was one of the first grades that graduated. And she went to work at a nursing home in Boonesboro called Readers. And she just felt that the influence that she was with the other ladies was kind of running her down spiritually. And so she had heard about Mountain View, and her and Melissa's sister Marie decided to go visit. And so she went down there and started working in the kitchen in 1992. And somewhere along the line, a couple of us went down to visit, and I will say that it was probably a low point in my life spiritually. I had a couple dating experiences that didn't go well. A lot of my friends were married. I was about 23 when I went to Mountain View. A lot of my friends had gotten married, and for whatever reason, I don't know, some of that cobweb stuff is just too foggy, but I felt a connection when I visited down there, and the people were friendly, and sorry, Keith, but I think you and I went to Sears and we watched television instead of going to revival. I just wanted to tell you that. I probably talked him into it just for his benefit, but we skipped out on a revival class, and the reason I brought that up, it was 1993. If any of you remember the Dream Team, that's what we watched. The bunch of professional basketball players were in the Olympics and pretty much annihilated the competition. I looked it up just to kind of a reference to make sure my dates were right. And at one point, the difference between their score and their competition was actually higher than the competition's total points. They were more than double the amount, and it was almost a comedy show. But that was one thing. We went back several times, and I decided to join Camp Week, which in Mountain View is a week of, in the fall, cleanup and little projects. Maybe a dozen other people that either have relatives at Mountain View or are interested in coming there later, and just gradually learned to know more people. They were very open, and I decided to go there. I believe that I went there around September, October in 1993. And one of the reasons is I have a picture here of 94, so I probably went there after that. I want to read the vision of Mountain View. Number 1, to exalt the name of Jesus in everyday experience as a way of life. Number 2, to reflect the Spirit of Christ in providing Christian care for the aged. And I should have said this on the onset. Most of you know that it's an old folks' home, but I should have brought that up, that's what we do there. To stimulate spiritual and personal maturity in our staff by providing meaningful work and study opportunities. And we had special Bible studies. I don't know that it was in-depth like Bible school where you actually had a test, but we had small groups that we worked. And number 4, to support world evangelism by sharing our resources and by active participation. And when I was there in the early 90s, Mountain View Nursing Home gave $250,000 a year to missions that they supported. My car that I bought was about $14,000, just to give you a perspective. So that was a fair amount of money to be given to a mission. So when I went to Mountain View, we had about a 3-week course of certified nurse's aid taught by a registered nurse. We were orderlies. There was about seven guys my age to a little older. We lived in a dorm. We lived we had a living room, we had a bunk bed section, we had a small bathroom, and then if you were there for longer than anybody else, there was another room with a few bunk beds in. And I just wanted to introduce a couple of the men that I worked with. We had Tim. He was a beachy person from Pennsylvania. I don't know what town. Russell Hertzler. He was a conservative Mennonite, a little more liberal than what I was, from South Carolina, and he was well known. His grandfather actually started the Wilderness Boys Camp down there, and his grandfather also helped build the building at Mountain View Nursing Home. We had a boy named Lawrence. He was from Montana. He was some type of a Mennonite. I don't believe he was beachy. Later, his brother Wendell also came there. We had a Wendell Hostetler from South Carolina. His father was a bishop and a beachy person from Whispering Pines, South Carolina. We had Aaron from Kentucky. He wore suspenders. He was a planer, some kind of a beachy or a fellowship person, and he told jokes. All of his jokes started with, there was this one old boy, very interesting young man. There was a Mike from Virginia. He was a first-generation Christian, and while we worked with him, he decided he wanted to join the military. He got to where he could do 90 push-ups. He probably came up to about my chin. Another very interesting character. He later changed his mind, and he married a girl from Virginia there, and I believe he still lives there. His name was Michael Jackson. He didn't like his name, so he changed it to Michael Wallace. There was a beachy boy named John from Plain City, and then later Ed, my wife's, from her youth group. Ed, I'll just say, is a very colorful person. There was never a dull moment when Ed was around. I wouldn't even tell you in private some of the things that we got into, but there was never a dull moment that Ed would do anything. I'll just say it that way. There was Jane's brother Jimmy. I worked with him for about 2 weeks. There was another John Wagler. We named him Wiggly because there were 2 Johns. And I also worked with Dwayne's son David's father-in-law, Mervyn Glick. And he was a pilot. He wasn't a VSer. He worked there several days a week. I don't believe he was paid, but he lived in the area. He was from a very liberal Mennonite church, but he married a girl that I also worked with, a fairly plain beachy girl, and they go to church in Virginia. And one more man came. He was a RN. He had been a military policeman, I believe, in the Marines. He was from Waco, Texas, and I looked up when the David Koresh thing happened in Waco, and it was in '93, and so that would have been very fresh on my mind, and this man would have worked in a psycho ward. People with schizophrenia that are locked in a room, people that are in the straitjackets so they can't hurt themselves and other people, and another very colorful. I spent many a night duty talking to that man, and he had some very interesting religious convictions. He basically admitted that he would like to be Amish someday and get rid of his car, and we would go into great detail about how he would do that. So that's just our group, and Mountain View Nursing Home had about 40 beds. Around 10 of them were for men. So the orderlies took care of the men, and about 11 nurses' age girls took care of the 30 or so women. And at 6 bells in the morning, you were on the floor and you started waking them up and getting them dressed and feeding them breakfast. You had a wake-up call at 5:30, 5:45. And one of my interesting experiences while I was doing night duty is you would flip the little dials for an intercom in everyone's bedroom, and you would have to make sure they answered back. And it's quite interesting, people's voices in the morning when you wake them up at 5:30. Some of them you wonder if they're even going to make it down to the nurse's station the way they sound. You first played them. We were only allowed to play a cappella music at Mountain View in those days, and so you would play them a verse of something on a cassette, and then you would call all the names out of the people that were to be on the floor. Along with those I mentioned, there were usually about 2 of those girls going through a nurses program. They would be there for 2 years, and they would eventually be an LPN. They had to work as nurses' aides on the floor. There were about 7 nurses that rotated around. There were about 9 nurses and 7 kitchen help. There were 3 married men that were there for probably 2 years. Eldon Hostetler was our administrator. He had been there for probably 10 years. There was a unit leader, which was our boss. He made our schedule. And then there was a maintenance man, and he would do anything that had to do with working on a dryer, washing machine, plumbing, and work around. Our building was old, and so it needed a lot of help from time to time. So after we went through our CNA course, our job was, I mentioned, at 6 o'clock, working with the residents, feeding them breakfast. We took their blood pressure and heartbeat and that kind of thing once a month. One day a week we would have a day off group, and whoever in the whole staff was probably about 37 to 43 people, and we would sometimes have a fairly large group and do something exciting. But you would have one day off a week. All of us guys would have one day where we helped out the maintenance man, and then, of course, sometimes you would take off for a few days and go home. Because I was 2 hours away from home, I would usually make just a short trip on a weekend for communion or something. But some people would take off for a week. One of the nice things about Mountain View that I remember is that, though, when you did take off that time, when you came back, there would be a big poster, and everybody would sign it. Excuse me. Everybody would sign their name and write some kind of little phrase. And as you got back into work, of course, you wouldn't run into everybody. We had different shifts. They would always say, "Welcome back, welcome back." It almost kind of be you look at somebody like, did I say welcome back to him? But it was a family feeling, working together that everyone had. There was a lot of jokes. There was a lot of ribbing. The things I remember is that they made fun of me for my sod shirts. And those of you who don't know what that means, I'm assuming it comes from Sodom and Gomorrah. But Beachies back then wore solid colors, so this shirt would be sod. If you took away your Anabaptist plain coat and your covering, you would be sod. They went sod. So I got some ribbing for that, but I honestly thought that these girls' dresses, they were bright yellow and red. I mean, I would never have seen anything like that in any of our churches. So I kind of gave it back the other way. I got teased for how I said wash my clothes, which pretty much cured me. To this day, I don't say that. My grandma always made coffee. We said coffee, and there again, I got made fun of that. But it seemed like someone always had your back. If your job didn't go right, if a resident acted up, somebody always had your back. I will have to say, it was a very family feeling there, almost so much that when I came back here, it was hard to go from that culture back to here. All right. So what are the cons of a place like, and I want to say Faith Mission, Mountain View, the Hillcrest are probably all run about the same. The con could be you're away from your family or your home youth. Because of my experience, it wasn't so much of a thing for me. It was almost like I needed a new experience in life. The other thing that might be a problem for some people is the low income. We made $80 a month for the first 6 months, and then we made $120. A lot of people didn't have a car. They might not have been able to afford. I did have a car. My parents paid for my insurance for the year. Low income might be a con. The work is messy. And after you're there about, 2 months, it's actually something you brag about, how big the mess was, how bad it was that night. Try to see if you could get the newbies to gag a little bit over lunch. And maybe another con would be the crowded dorm. Dealing with a lack of enthusiastic workers. There's always one or two people that just didn't seem to quite pull their weight. And as I went through that list, you can see we were from a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of areas in the U.S. I didn't mention a boy named Sheldon. I think he might have actually left before I worked there, or I worked with him very little. His parents were missionaries, and it's somewhere along the line he didn't get the whole work ethic thing, and it was a little hard if you came on shift after he was done. He just wasn't neat with his work, and so that's some of the cons. Dealing with a lack of first-class operations. Things were very bare, block building, just the minimum necessities. The dorm was very bare. Keith would tell you it wasn't the greatest spick and span, clean place to be. But I want to switch to the pros, and I have the first thing is the same thing, the low income. Everyone got the same amount of money. It's almost like the Mennonite version of communism. We believe in God, but we share everything. You had to share everything. Everybody was poor together. We worked together as a team. We lived together. We slept in the same room. You had to learn to get along with people from different cultures, different backgrounds, different convictions, not extremely different, but lots of good discussions that we had. A lot of in-depth Bible study and reading time during my year there. You learned that you didn't need the best of everything. We played volleyball outside, and sometimes we would grumble that some of that money we were giving to the missions could be given to a better area, maybe a roof over the volleyball thing. I think another pro, though, is giving back, and here in a minute or two I'll talk about that a little more. And just the feeling that you're giving back, and specifically at Mountain View with elderly, the thought that, think about your grandparents at some point where they can't get around as well and they need help, and you're there and able to help them to. My residents, one was a farmer, one had actually been a state delegate, one had a Down syndrome. Somebody thought that he might have been the oldest Down syndrome person in the U.S. at one point. Lots of different characters, and just thinking about what they would have been like 20 years ago and being able to help them was great. Of course, the money generated for missions could be a Mountain View specific thing, and of course, through this whole thing, I met Jane, so for me, that was a pro of VS. So it's very fulfilling to work at a place like Mountain View or to work on a project like the school. it's something that I felt very strongly about. In fact, I think Linford could tell you that I mentioned that I will have all of my children go kind of do the same thing. And somewhere Derek kind of slipped out of that. But regardless, I learned a lot of key life lessons of helping others, giving back. I was a very shy person, especially when I was 16 to 18. It wasn't easy for me to go down and talk to strangers, and so that was one of the things that helped me learn to work with other people. And I keep mentioning different cultures and different ages. We had people there that were in their 50s and never gotten married. A lot of different blends of things. So somebody interviewed Mother Teresa at one point and asked her, is it only the affluent who give? And her answer was, no, even the poorest of the poor give. Once a very poor beggar came up to me and said, everyone gives to you, and I also want to give you 20 pesa. I think I said that right, which is about 2 pennies. I thought to myself, what do I do? If I take it, he won't have anything to eat. But if I don't take it, I would hurt him so much. So I took it, and he was so happy he gave to Mother Teresa of Calcutta to help the poor. And then her response to that also is that giving cleans the heart and helps you get closer to God. You get so much back in return. And I will have to say in my time at Mountain View, I did receive a lot more back in return than I felt that I lost with a year of missed income that I could have worked for my dad at Eby's Garage. John 12:26 says this, if any man serve me, let him first follow me, and where I am, there shall also my servant be. If any man serve me, him will my Father honor. So Jesus says, if you serve me, you will serve the Father, and him will my Father honor. So there it is, getting back what you give. Luke 22:26, but ye shall not be so. And this is Jesus talking about how the Gentiles want to rule over each other. But he that is greatest among you, let him be as the younger, and he that is chief as he that doth serve. And we call that sometimes an upside-down idea, that those that serve are the ones that lead. So I hope you've gained some insight, and I hope I can challenge maybe some youth, maybe some parents to in turn challenge their youth to at least consider a year of voluntary service at some point.
Good evening. Some of the things Doran said definitely resonated with me very much. It was definitely a different era, for sure, but I think we had some things in common. So I was in a similar shoes as Doran. For me, most of my friends were married or dating at the time. So a little bit of a background. How did I end up in Haiti, and how did my decision take me there? One of my good friends, Davy Steinhauer, was dating a girl who was actually at the Christian Aid Ministries base in Titayen, Haiti, and they were in desperate need of a warehouse manager, so they decided to give my name. So I received a call from a certain Dave King on the board at Christian Aid Ministries. They were in need of a warehouse manager there in Titayen at the Christian Aid Ministries base. So after a few months of giving that some thought, I decided that would be a good thing for me to do. It was rather stressful. So I have a I wasn't sure how to lay out my talk here, so I have a kind of a little bit of an outline. What was my role? What was my job? Notable events, and what did I learn? So I had been outside of the United States multiple times prior to this, but after I gave my consent that I would go, I went to the CAM headquarters in Ohio, Berlin, Ohio, for some very intensive 2-week training. I found out that CAM is a very well-oiled machine. They are detailed and like their I's dotted and T's crossed, and for a very good reason. What was involved in being warehouse manager? They had a very detailed inventory program. Every bag of wheat, every bag of rice, every bottle of oil was inventoried in a computer system. It was my job to be the shipping and receiving manager. Containers came in, I would unload them. I got very good at running a forklift. That was a small little perk to the job. And for those of you who wondered or always did not know, yes, you can load a dump truck with a forklift. There was many unconventional things we had to do, being that the CAM warehouse here in Pennsylvania that sends the containers has machinery that I did not have in T-Tayan. So unloading a container may look like chaining a Land Cruiser to the back of my forklift, chaining the forklift to whatever was in the container and dragging it out. Many times we had to do that. But being warehouse manager involved loading many international box trucks. On certain Fridays, the delivery trucks were loaded for the school routes that went out. I had 2 Haitian employees who helped me. It was our job to make sure that the trucks were properly loaded. A truck that was not properly loaded would result in potential vegetable oil running out the back door of the truck because of the extremely rough roads. So it was a bit of a trick learning how to load trucks. One of the most challenging parts of the job was Med Week. And Med Week was when the medical director would give me a list of things that needed to be done to prepare for the meds that had to be given out to the clinics. And so Med Week involved about 35 spreadsheets of individual medications that need to be gathered, medical supplies, and packaged on pallets to be shipped out. Some bottles of medications, if they were given a dollar value, were worth potentially around $700 a bottle. And it was an enjoyable challenge going through all the shelving, starting with number 1 on the list for said clinic, putting that in a box, boxing it up. Every single bottle was inventoried, every needle was inventoried, every bandage was inventoried. And we would go through all these lists for 35 individual clinics, collecting bottles, needles, bandages, amoxicillin, you name it. And when you arrived at the very, very last clinic, and there were supposed to be 35 bottles of amoxicillin left on the shelf, you hoped that you counted right. We never got it quite perfect. I always was challenged to myself when I started out that I was going to get this just right. And when you ended up at the very last clinic and the very last thing on the shelf, that would be the exact amount of bottles there. Most of the time there was, but often there was maybe cough syrup or something that there was 1 bottle missing that possibly got miscounted. Speaking of income, I think Doran said, I can't quite remember what they started out. We were given $200 a month. That was our allowance. Was to purchase any personal items. Christian Aid Ministries purchased all food, everything was taken care of. I stayed in a house with 5 other single guys. We were allowed 2 weeks off per year to fly home. And I think if you were there over 2 or 3 years, you were given maybe 4 weeks. So I decided to split that up, and I flew home for 1 week, and then one of my good friends was getting married, so I flew home for another week for the wedding. I was there for a little under 2 years. I think it was 1 year and 8 months to be exact. Some notable events. Mentioning how things were a little stressful at the beginning, being in a country that I'd never been in, speaking a language I'd never spoken, meeting people I never met, and doing a job I'd never done. First few weeks was stressful at first, learning the inventory program. I had 2 months to learn it, and then the previous warehouse manager was gone. It's kind of a sink or swim situation, and I would view that as a pro, probably not a con in my experience. So, some notable events. I had to run away from a gunfight. We did not get kidnapped, thankfully, but my heart definitely went out to those who were kidnapped here. This is about 6 or 8 months ago. But seems like the police were always in a gunfight with somebody. And some of the Haitians really, really wanted to bring back the old army. And so there was always this group that would get together, and they decided they were gonna bring back the Haitian army. They really needed an army. Well, the police, it was illegal, and the police didn't allow that. So we were in Port-au-Prince, me and a few other fellas. And suddenly vehicles just began turning around and just heading the other direction as fast as they could. Heard a bunch of gunshots, and police were suiting up. And you could smell the gunpowder in the air. So we tried to get out of there as fast as we could. That was memorable. Another very memorable experience was on the way back from La Sousse, which was about a 3 hours ride on a very, very rough road from Titayen. We were there visiting for a weekend. We had brought several Haitian ladies with us. They needed a ride, so they're on the back of the pickup. And the one lady was pregnant and had her baby on the back of her pickup. That was definitely memorable. Thankfully, Vince and Darla were along. And Darla, just being a very non-drama person and a very capable mom of 6, was able to help out with that. And at the next town, she got off holding a very healthy baby. Hurricanes and cholera outbreaks. Cholera is very rampant in Haiti due to very unhealthy and insanitary situations. And the med director, who was dry masked when I was there, he had a lot of experience, was there for probably 10 years before I was there. He would purchase as many cholera products as he could. IV solution, needles, stocking up, because our capabilities there at the CAM base was larger than most. Our ability there to store and manage inventory and keep medical supplies. I couldn't remember if it was spring or fall that cholera outbreak usually happens. A little bit like Jordan mentioned. It's amazing how 10 to 12 years can begin to put things in cobwebs. But it was clinics would begin calling right and left, and people were dying. We need IV solution. Haitian people, they would carry one another. Usually 4 or 5 men would carry someone who had cholera. Out of the mountains, coming out of towns, walking paths. It was a very deadly disease if it was not treated, very deadly sickness if it was not treated right away. They would bath in streams and drink the river water, and cholera was just very, very something that you could get very quickly, very spreadable. We had approximately three 3 to 4 sea containers parked out along the main driveway, and that was just simply full of nothing but IV solution for cholera. It was my job to inventory that. And I remember very well Zach from the one clinic. Zach was a very colorful man. He had a very amazing experience meeting the Lord. He decided just to put his whole life into voluntary service work. So he and his 2 daughters went and started a clinic in Haiti. And I remember many times he would call me and we're out of IV solution. There's people laying on beds outside the clinic. We can't hold them all. Can I please come get IV solution? And it was always an open door. Sure, come on over. I'll load you up with anything we have. So basically, a day being warehouse manager pretty much looked like unloading any containers that came in, inventorying that, meanwhile preparing for the trucks that needed to go out to the schools. When I was there was a school director over the school programs. You all may know this, probably if you support CAM. You can support a school, help provide lessons for students. And then, of course, the medical program, supplying clinics with medical supplies. All medical supplies were donated to Christian Aid Ministries, but they're still given a dollar value to track for the accounting at the end of the year. So the warehouse was stocked wheat and oil and rice for the schools, and we inventoried all medical supplies that came in on containers to send out to the clinics. Value of a sea container could average anywhere from $600,000 to several $1 million per container. And that all had to be carefully tracked and inventoried and then counted out to be sent out. What did I learn? Did I learn anything in a year and 8 months there? What were the pros and cons? For me, I feel like it was a tremendously good experience. I was surprised how easy it was for me to forget, but I think I was 20 years old when I went down. And I thought that for me, that was a pretty capable age at the time, but looking back, 20 years old seems a little young. To say goodbye to your parents and hop on a plane with a one-way ticket for a third world country. When I stepped off the plane, I didn't even know who or what the person's name was who was going to pick me up at the airport. You go and you don't look back. Hope you didn't get sent home because you weren't capable or couldn't do the job. So, what did I learn? Definitely responsibility. Seeing life in a new way. You get to see lives of people in a very raw, unfiltered way of life. The affluence we enjoy here in the States can be very cushioning and can be a lot of padding around us from the real, raw humanity that is out there. In Haiti, pain is expected. Losing a spouse or family member is considered normal. Most people have accepted the fact that they can't afford medical care, so they will likely have to live or cope with some type of handicap or suffering. If there's pain, you see it. If there's suffering, everybody knows about it. If there's a problem, you share it. And community is huge. And that was new for me. Just my Haitian helpers would come to work, come meet me there in the office in the morning at the warehouse, and their daughter was sick, their son was sick. I'll never forget another good experience. A bunch of us boys were there at the house. We had made supper and we were there eating, and there's 2 Haitian boys eating there with us that evening. And one of the other voluntary service boys, he come walking in. He had already had his food, and he come stomping in there. And the one Haitian boy, he got up and walked over and handed him his food. And in Creole said, "Would you like my supper? Would you like my food?" And I never forgot that. That was very impactful to me. It is typical in the Haitian culture that if there's someone in the room, they should all have food. It's very improper and not right for someone to be eating and other people to be hungry. So this VS boy came in there, and this young Haitian boy, probably 13 or 14, very dutifully offered him his food. Even though he did not have enough to eat himself, he was willing to share what he had. What else did I learn? I witnessed various leadership styles, and this was a big one to me, very challenging to me. Enjoyed the benefit of watching some very excellent leaders in action. Also learning a few things of what not to do. There was a very high turnover rate when I was there of in-country, what they called in-country administrators, which was quite unusual. I had no less than 3 administrators while I was there. They definitely taught me a lot. One of them in particular was a very outstanding leader. I admired him very much. He earned every single one of us boys' respect in a very short manner of time. And some of the VS boys I was there, most of them ranged from 25 to probably 33 and had many, many, many years of experience. But he came in, and he was not the type just to run over the place, take over, tell everyone what to do. First thing he did, sat down with each one of us individually and asked us what he can do to make our lives easier. Said he appreciated what each one of us did, and it was his goal, his job, to support us and make our lives as easy as possible. What ways he can back us up. And that just always stood out to me. Not only did he lead with his head, but he led with his head and his heart. A little bit like Doran mentioned, being there with many and various people from many different backgrounds, many different cultures, many different denominations. While we were there, the German Baptist had a very heavy presence. I figured while I was there was German Baptist, Western Fellowship, 2 different shades of Beachy, and Pilgrim Mennonite. And it was very meaningful to me. We actually had a communion service with all of us. That was impactful. And just very meaningful to me to think about the larger body of Christ and how we can all pull together as Christians under Christ. Another pro, if you're willing, you can learn a lot about yourself. And I felt that was very good for me. And I want to encourage anyone who has the experience or the time or the ability to do this, throw themselves into a sink or swim situation. May not be for everyone, but it can be a very solid experience and a great teacher. Teaches perseverance and responsibility, especially when stripped of securities and comforts of our home area and long-term friends. That was a bit of a challenging thing for me for the first 2 weeks, I well remember. First part of the day was learning the inventory program, learning the ways of the warehouse. Then at 3 o'clock in the afternoon was language school. And it was very mentally taxing, mentally wearing. I thought I'd studied Spanish before I went down, thought I was going to go to Honduras. That didn't pan out. So I found out that Spanish doesn't help me much when learning Creole, as Creole is a form of French. But I'm still not good at languages. What I usually ended up doing was getting myself into more trouble than I could get myself out of when I tried to speak Creole, and they thought I knew it. The only humorous thing that happened to me one time was just here a few years ago when I was discussing with a customer, they were a black customer, about a contract, and it happened to be that they were from Haiti. So she got on the phone and began rattling with her husband in Creole about me and my price in the contract. And when she got off the phone, I said to her in Creole, "So I understand you speak Creole." That was very enjoyable and amusing. But I definitely want to encourage anybody who is thinking of going into voluntary service to definitely do it. Working with people, working with different cultures is a great experience. Understanding that the world around us is not like we have it here at home. Just a few words about the Haitian airport. It was an experience all on its own. 2010 was the earthquake, if you all may remember that. Very, very devastating earthquake in Haiti. and I went down in April of 2011, and the airport was still mostly destroyed. But I had to learn to wear two different personalities. One personality here at home and my Haiti personality. Elbowing is not considered rude. When you get off the plane in the Haitian airport, it's just understood that you make your presence known. People stand on the baggage belt. They can't turn the baggage belt on because people are standing on it, jumping up and down, wanting their luggage. It's very tight, no air conditioning, and everyone wants to get out as fast as they can. So the people just come up to you and either tap you on the shoulder or elbow you asking for money. Is not considered rude to just push your way through. And so it was just a very, very different way of life, one that I think it's good for everyone to experience. You step off in Miami Airport and it's a completely different world. But I like the challenge that Zach once told me, Zach, who I mentioned earlier, that had the clinic. He told me many times that as he sits in airports, he often, he said he makes it a matter of prayer that God would teach him which is the more realistic way of life. Is it the Haitian airport or is it the Miami airport? Which is there, looking at it from a very subjective point of view, a relative point of view, is one better than the other? Does the way we have it here in the United States benefit us as much as we think? So it's a very, very challenging time for me. Definitely helped me grow in my spiritual life. Taught me many things. Mainly taught me to rely on the Lord. Was not always, for the most part, it was more safe when I was there than it was here as of the last few years due to the political climate there. But the mission within about 1 mile of T-Tie-In mission, several people came in and shot several of them while I was there. So you never know when the Lord maybe would decide it was time for someone to come to the Christian Aid Ministries compound and do something. The only terrifying thing I do remember happening was at 4 o'clock in the morning. I was in bed, supposed to be sleeping, and I looked over and my doorknob in my bedroom was turning. And I was quite terrified about it. But the door opened, and here was one of the VS boys wanted my keys to the warehouse. He was hoping I was sleeping. It's a wonder I didn't jump out of bed at him or something. But I just remember being there and watching my doorknob slowly turn to my bedroom. Another thing we learned to live with was lizards. If you don't like lizards, Haiti's not for you. Lizards are absolutely everywhere. They're in your bed, they're in your ceiling, they're on your walls, and you just learn to deal with them. It's kind of a joke that first 6 months you try to get rid of all the lizards. About a year there, you deal with them and you're used to them. Second year, you begin to look for them and you miss them. It was almost true, as we did definitely get used to them being everywhere. Somehow they managed to always get in. One more interesting detail, we didn't have hot water heaters. And Dwayne, you may be very familiar with this method of heating water, but there was a black drum on the roof of our guys' dorm, big black, I think it was maybe 2 50-gallon drums possibly, and they heated the water since it was mostly sunny every single day. It was amazing how hot water can get being in a black drum on top of a roof. So it was just a simple gravity flow of hot water, and it actually worked very, very well. Most everyone had enough hot water for showers by evening time. If you tried to take a shower in the morning, it was going to be cold. But we did not have electric hot water heaters. It was all heated through the barrels on the roof in that way. A few more details. Devil worship was very rampant. And there was this parade called Rah-Rahs when I was there. And they would beat drums calling the devil during their voodoo worship for hours and hours on end. And it was kind of an eerie thing. You kind of got used to there would be a rah-rah goodbye on the road outside of the mission. Late into the night, just a steady beating of a drum. And it was well known to you, always best to avoid rah-rahs at all times. They could become very, very violent. They would pull people out of their cars and get them involved in their devil worship experience. So facing that was always a very real thing. My job mainly kept me on base there at the T-Italian compound, but many of the other single VS boys who got out quite a bit witnessed and saw many very interesting things, demon-possessed people. Witch doctor huts were everywhere. You knew them because they were marked with specially colored flags. We just knew that was a witch doctor's hut. So hopefully this was challenging to you, and a little bit like Doran mentioned, if there's anyone who considering doing something, going to a third world country, witnessing in that way, definitely I feel like it was a very, very positive thing in my life. Can reward you many times for many years to come.
I invite you to stand and sing number 767. Number 767. No, so. seated.
Good evening, everyone. It's good to hear from the other two guys that shared so far. And their experiences were a little farther away than mine. I only had to drive like an hour and 45 minutes to go home, which might have been a bad thing, actually, because I tend to go home too much on the weekends, maybe. But yeah, for those of you who don't know, I was at Allegheny Boys Camp for about a year. Kind of what got me started there was I went on a canoe trip with two chiefs, Paul Lehman and Carlson Funk. Carlson was a chief at Bald Eagle, and Paul had been a chief at Allegheny not real long before that. And so they knew all the stuff about taking canoe trips and all the fun stuff you do at boys' camps. And so they got all the gear together, borrowed some stuff from camp, and we went on a canoe trip. And we were just talking there as we were floating along, and Paul was like, hey, Allegheny needs a maintenance man really bad right now, like really bad. Like, they'll take somebody in like a week or something. And I was like, well, that's kind of down my line. I enjoy that kind of stuff. And so I went, actually. I called Chief Brian. Well, back up a little bit. Our school had been there, the 11th and 12th grade had been there back close to when they started. I was in 11th grade. And we helped them build a campsite. And the girls worked in the library, I think, and got some stuff in order. And we enjoyed that a lot. And so I had a little bit of experience at camp to draw from. I really had enjoyed that week. And so, yeah, I was kind of eager, actually, to go. It wasn't one of these things where it was a long, drawn-out, I prayed for months and years about it or anything. It was just, hey, there's an opportunity. I'm going to go. So I called Chief Brian, and he about half remembered me, maybe not totally. And actually, the service down there is really bad. So I texted and got a hold of his wife, and then he called me back. And, yeah, it was the way it was. And that's how it is down there still, I think. No service. So it kind of puts you out on the mission field, even though you're not that far. But, yeah, so I went down for 2 weeks. And actually, when I got there, I just came in the office, and Miss Lorraine was there. We call everyone Miss and Chief around camp. And she told me what was going on a little bit. Chief Les he's a guy that comes around there, I guess he still does, and does building projects here and there along the way. And he was building a new chief's lodge, so I went and helped him. He had just got done with the foundation, and he was leveling out stone and getting some framing done, so I helped him with that. And yeah, I was just there for 2 weeks. I went home for about a week, I think. This was in 2016, and I was there till 2017 in the fall, like September. So, yeah, I helped him, and then we talked about it a little, and I decided that I would come back and serve for a full year, so that's what I did. So, yeah, I maybe at the end I'll talk a little bit more about my experiences there. I kind of wrote up a little bit of an outline, maybe 7 points to think about when you're thinking about doing VS work. My first point is decide what you're going to do. That's kind of obvious. But decide based on what your talents are, maybe. And maybe that's what you'll tend to go toward anyway. What are your talents? If you're not really into teaching school, if you're not a classroom buddy, so to speak, don't push yourself into that, maybe. Although God can enable. If you're not experienced with construction or mechanics or you name it, maybe you would make a good school teacher. That's just my experience that for me it was a no-brainer because that's the kind of stuff I enjoy doing already. And a lot of people are good at a variety of things, and so it might make the choice harder, but I think God will open a door. He might open a few doors, and you'll have to choose one to walk through, and He'll enable you to do what you're called to do. Second point is don't let your current job be too much of a hindrance for getting involved in VS work. I'm not just saying you should just pack up your bags and head out and say, hey, I'm quitting now next week. But, I mean, you could look at verse 18 through 20 of Matthew 4 where it said, I'll just read that. to balance this thought out. And Jesus, walking by the Sea of Galilee, saw two brethren, Simon called Peter, and Andrew his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishers. And he said unto them, Follow me, and I'll make you fishers of men. And they straightway left their nets and followed him. Now, that's up for interpretation, what straightway means. But I think we've complicated, with our modern way of doing businesses and stuff, we've complicated the whole thing of leaving our nets. That part of it's complicated because we have to delegate a lot of things to a lot of people sometimes to do that. For me, it wasn't too bad. I mean, part of a family electrical business, and it's fairly flexible. And my older brother was still working with us. About the time I was quitting at Allegheny was the time that he was leaving and moving to another area, was no longer working with us. So I kind of had to come back, and so I didn't take up chiefing then. I just stopped with being a maintenance man. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend leaving your boss high and dry or just leaving off without giving some thought. But there's a thing where, yeah, you just have to be ready to go if an opportunity presents itself. Yeah, I would say, yeah, definitely don't get too stressed about your job. There will be a lack of income, as was mentioned already. I think I got about $100 from the camp, and I got about $100 from my home church, so about $200 a month. And that's plenty, really. I mean, if you're single, you don't need that much money. But anyway, my third point is don't get stuck in analysis paralysis. That's what they call it. That's what they call it in the stock market, I think. That's just where I got that term from, actually, where you're so stuck on analyzing all the details, how it's going to work out, that you really can't make a move. You just sit there. You're paralyzed from analyzing. Yeah, talk to your friends and family about it, and yeah, make a wise choice, and pray about it for sure. But after a while, if an opportunity comes up, you just have to go. God will call you, and you will go if you're making the right choice. Another point I have is have an open mind toward learning new things. Volunteers come from a very wide variety of backgrounds and have various experiences in their life, and they're going to do things a lot different than you probably. And somewhere along the way, you have to build a common ground that you can have a working relationship, that yeah, you can get along. And I think sometimes God will just test your humility by bringing someone along that rubs you the wrong way. And it takes a lot of patience sometimes when you're working in an unfamiliar area and you have your way of doing things. Like I was like the main maintenance man, but then I had to work with other people. With Dolan Eby, he's still there. He was doing the other part of it, like the mechanics and stuff. But as far as the daily stuff, I basically became the main maintenance man that filled in all the cracks and stuff. And so I could take that and say, well, I feel ownership here, and not want to do how people thought I should do it. And it takes humility when you're in a position like that to just submit. Chief Brian, of course, he was the director, and he would tell me to do things a certain way, and I had to just say, well, I'll do it, even though I didn't always agree with it. And that's how it is. Yeah, definitely good to learn to work with other people. I grew up working in a family business, and in a family, you do things very similar, so it was a good stretch for me to do things different. My fifth point would be just be eager to learn new things, new skills. It's kind of similar to my last point, but be ready to be stretched out of your comfort zone. I would say what I did there was less out of my comfort zone than if I would have become a chief. That really stretches you a lot, but it was in and of itself, it stretched me a bit. Yeah, I did have to see over the boys a night a week while the chiefs were having their meeting with the supervisors. We would watch like a Christian movie or whatever, and that was a way to get them away from the chiefs, just so chiefs and supervisors could compare notes for a while. And yeah, that was good. I mean, usually nothing went down too crazy because they were occupied watching a nature movie or whatever. Animals doing their stuff in nature is pretty neat. But go with the mindset that you're there to help people. At camp, I know it's one of those places that, and maybe other places are that way too. Mountain View might have the same thing. I think it does, where weekends you kind of party up. The Chiefs come off duty, and they're so used to being with crazy boys. I mean, I just said they act crazy. And so the Chiefs come off duty, and they act crazy. But yeah, you're there not just to party, you're there to help people. And I think the Chiefs, they kept a good vision. The ones that I was there with, they kept a good vision of what they're there for. But yeah, that's what it's all about, is to change lives. I mean, to influence lives for the better, and God can change them. Be committed to what God has called you to in your work. I would say, give you a little story maybe. So we have home visits several times a year where the boys go home and the Chiefs and whoever wants to stay around can, but a lot of them go home to their families at least sometimes. And I was home, and I forget what I was doing at home, but we had a family gathering then. And I kind of lost track of where things were at camp as far as the exact day I was supposed to be back. And I get this call from Chief Brian, "Hey, where are you actually at, Brian?" And I was like, "Oh, wait, I thought it was tomorrow we were supposed to be coming back." And I felt kind of dumb, but it came back to just being responsible, being committed. You're there to serve. Don't be wandering off without telling people what's going on. I did actually sing in a choir. I sang in Mountain View Chorus while I was there, so I drove up. It was a little closer for practices than Cumberland Valley, so I did that, and I enjoyed that, went on tour. That was a good experience. It was able to be fit into my camp schedule, so that was nice. My last point would basically be just focus primarily on relationships. Depending on your job description, it's easy to get caught up in your work and not focus on building good relationships with people. I know as a maintenance man, some days I was just working by myself a lot, and I had to make an effort to go out and talk to people, come into Chalk Wagon early, help set tables, interact with the boys, because I wasn't a chief. That didn't come with my job as much. So yeah, depending on what you're doing, sometimes you have to make more of an effort to interact with others on a positive and a good level of learning to know them and what they're dealing with. Some things I would recommend maybe is probably serve for at least a year or at least 6 months. One advantage of serving longer than just like a month or two, I mean, I know there's a lot of short-term missions, and they're good, and they can give you an interest for longer-term things. But if you're going to actually do VS and not just going on a trip, I think you can have better chance of building relationships with people and actually making a difference. But I will say that there's groups that came there. I was a maintenance man. Work groups that would come, and they made a big impact. I mean, you have all this firewood needs cut. Well, they came in and they got it done. And so there's room for that as well. But if you want to pursue VS, I'd recommend a 1-year term, or 2-year term might be even better. That's what Chiefs did, still do, I think. Yeah, I would say this point, my last point, focus on building relationships, applies more to just the people going on VS though as well. If you can keep a connection with people that are going out on mission field, and they can keep connection with you with email or phone calls or anything, that makes a difference, because especially if it's longer term, there's a tendency to get disconnected very much from your home congregation, and maybe a lot of water goes over the dam and you get a little disheartened about maybe how things are at your home congregation, and then you might end up not even going back there. And life moves on. Sometimes that happens, and it's not always bad, but I think there's value in staying accountable to your home congregation, definitely, and keeping that connection there. And I commend you all for even having something like this. I think having awareness like this and encouraging people and telling people what is available, making people aware of opportunities is a good thing, especially young people. If you're still single, there's all kinds of things you can do out there. I would recommend looking into something. So I guess I'll give a few pros maybe. I already gave pros. I didn't even give any cons, but maybe there aren't many cons. I mean, there are, like low income, but that's a non-issue really if you're single. So I think it can inspire growth in the local church as far as learning to reach out to community. If various people have gone out in the mission and then come back and they have ideas about how to do things, how to reach out to community, I think that can be positive if people understand each other and their each individual experiences and are able to work together at that. If you come back from the mission field with the idea that, well, I've done it now, so I got to figure it out, that ain't going to go everywhere well. But I think it can be very positive with the right attitudes. And VS in itself is just a great opportunity. There's so many opportunities to carry out the Great Commission that Jesus gave, just to go out into the world. And yeah, that's what we're here for, really, the Great Commission. And you don't have to go on VS to do that. You do that in your daily work. But VS carries many opportunities. And I think also just our focus can become a lot more on what really matters if we go on something like that. We're with a lot of other people that are doing the same thing. Down there is, like was mentioned at Mountain View, I think, it kind of feels like a family culture, and that's very positive. A lot of people just doing the same thing, and people are friendly, people are hospitable. You can go to their house for lunch if you're single staff. Just, it's understood you go there, and it's great. It's like a big family, and helps you to see that there's plenty of other people out there that have their focus on what matters, and inspires you to come back to your home community and keep the inspiration going. So I'll tell a little bit more about what I did while I was down there, maybe. Yeah, I helped build a house for the chiefs to stay in. At that point, they were staying in like the central area of camp. There was just kind of a rundown building there that they were staying in and making do. So we got that done. I think, yeah, we got that completed while I was there. Yeah, I did a variety of stuff. I have to think a little bit. I did laundry, which the maintenance man didn't do that anymore, but I did all the boys' laundry at that point. That was pretty time-consuming, actually. 4 washing machines and 2 big gas dryers, but it took quite a bit of time, like 2 days to get it all done, because I would go do it and keep loads going, and I would go try to get other stuff done at the same time while laundry was getting done. And thankfully, all the buildings there are close together. Not all camps are set out that way, so I could do that, run down to the maintenance building, get stuff done. See what else? Random. I did some wiring because I'm an electrician. I finished out a couple attics, basements. Yeah, I don't know. I can't remember everything, but it was definitely a good experience just working with other people. Chief Les, I appreciate a lot. He was managing the building stuff, basically. And yeah, I appreciated him a lot. On the weekends was a good time. That's where the family thing came in pretty strong. We would just go hop in a vehicle and go out to the woods and have a campfire and have a good time and kind of connect, share stories about what happened that week, and that was very inspiring. So any questions or anything? Maybe one of you all boys is going to be a chief or maintenance man. Any questions from anybody? Probably a lot of you all have visited there at one point, I would guess. If not, thank you for your attention. May God bless.
Let's sing number 810. Number 810.
Thank each one of these brethren to take their places. Very enjoyable, and for the two here from our own congregation, we learned things about you we didn't know before. It's very interesting. So I hope that gives us all something to think about, and think about that there's other ways to serve also. Let's stand for dismissal. Brother Dwayne, would you lead us?